If you're going DI into stuff, you do not have a space. You can't get the air in the room we were talking about. Everything's carpet. You're missing girth. You're missing harmonics. You're missing some energy. Take that track, right-click, hit duplicate, and make a parallel with Sansan and screw with Sansan. Tuck it in the mix. That thing has saved me so many times.
Welcome to Recording Studio Rockstars. I'm Lid Shaw, and this is the podcast created to help you become a rock star of the recording studio. Today's episode of Recording Studio Rockstars is sponsored by Roswell Pro Audio, maker of handcrafted microphones in California. Inspired design and impeccable attention to detail will help you capture a gorgeous vintage sound without the vintage price tag. Check out their beautiful line of microphones at roswellproaudio.com. You may already know that using true analog gear is one of the best ways to create a great record. Yet increasingly, we live in a digital world, recording and mixing inside the computer. So what if you could have the best of both worlds? Pickler Audio Manufaktur is bridging the analog-digital divide by creating high-end analog gear like the Schwerkraftmaschine compressor and the Raumzeitmaschine reverb, whose knobs you can control remotely using a plugin in your DAW. Or their many analog units like the Cream bus compressor with Mastering EQ, or the Veritube recording channel that let you save your settings using a custom recall sheet plugin, offering a complete line of pro audio gear from compressors to EQs to reverbs and beyond. Now you can get a pro analog sound while benefiting from the power of digital. Let your DAW help you move your knobs so that your music can move you. Click the link in the show notes to learn more about Pickler Audio Manufaktur. Hey Rockstars, it's your host Lid Shaw, and welcome to Recording Studio Rockstars, bringing you into the studio to learn from recording professionals so that you can make your best record ever and be a rock star of the studio yourself. My guest today is Ted Skolits, an audio engineer and music producer here in Nashville, Tennessee, who started out playing drums and guitar in school and local bands before gravitating towards the studio. Ted has been in the music industry for 10 years and has studied under Grammy-winning mastering engineer Bob Katz, Roger Nichols, and college professor Raul Valery. He works in both music production and post-production, as well as TV broadcast, A1, A2, live production, front of house, and monitors. He first cut his teeth working in an animation studio as lead sound design, mixing, and mastering animated shorts in stereo and surround, then went on to work at EA Sports video game company as an audio editor and a soundtrack composer for multiple AAA game titles. Ted has also worked at the music label Integrity Music as a staff studio engineer and has run front of house and live broadcast mixes for multiple mega churches. He has taught courses as a professor at Valencia College, including Introduction to Audio, live front of house engineering, and digital audio workstations. And he has also worked in Nashville on various TV programs ranging from the Dove Awards to the Pickler and Ben show. His current focus is producing independent artists ranging from pop to country to americana. Please welcome Ted Skolits to Recording Studio Rockstars. Ted, dude.
Hey, man.
Are you ready to rock?
I'm ready to rock.
Dude, it's a pleasure to have you here in the studio.
Yeah.
Glad to be jumping into the podcast with you.
Yeah.
How long have you been in Nashville? I can't remember if you said you were recently moved here or you had been here for a while.
Yeah. So me and my wife moved here about 3.5 years ago. And it's just been a great journey. And we got a family and we're staying put for a little bit. So
nice. And it's not a tiny family either, right? You have how many kids you got?
Yeah, we got 3 little girls.
Wow, it's amazing. Man.
Yeah. It's great.
I'm always really impressed when I meet somebody who's doing music and doing audio and basically supporting the family, Yeah.
I
had a big transition myself. It was years ago. I don't have a large family now. I'm single dad with one daughter, but at the time I went from single to trying to support a family of 5 all at once. And I'm totally acutely aware of the challenges of doing that stuff. So
yeah.
Congrats to you, man. Well done.
Thanks, man. It's kind of a different game because I remember doing it when I was single. I remember doing it when I was just married. And, you do kind of have to make different decisions for your work. and the business and the family and the work life, that all kind of plays a part into it. So yeah, it's a new dynamic, but I'm thankful.
So tell us about getting started in recording. How'd you get into all this stuff? I mean, you were playing music first, and then at some point you were like, I think I want to press the buttons over there on that big thing with all the buttons on it.
Well, to be honest, I was first enthralled with music from probably like age I might have been 7 years old, and my dad played drums in a lot of bands, and he brought me downstairs and he played a drum solo, and he turned out the lights in the basement, and he put on the black lights around the drum kit, and he had his drumsticks that had like neon like glow on it.
And it turns out your dad is also the drummer from the Flaming Lips and busted out the bubble machine at the same time.
More like 70s and 80s pop cover bands. But
nice.
Either way, but like it blew me away, blew my socks off. And I was like, I just felt something in my soul. I'm like, I'm addicted to this. This is crazy. And I just felt like I have to seek this. I can't get away from this. We had like a few amplifiers, and I just kind of got more into it. And then he went to one of his buddies' band's house, and they had this big PA system. My dad was like, "Hey, do you think we can use that for a little bit?" And so we got all this gear, and actually they had built some of the speakers themselves. So like big sub cabs and mid-range cabs, and I was obsessed. And all my buddies would come down to the basement. It was like, Ted's Place, let's go jam out.
Ted's Place.
Yeah.
I feel like you need to have a show called Ted's Place.
That's good. Ted's Place. Not quite Ted's Talks, Ted's Place.
Right. So groovy. And then and then you ended up going, like, how'd you get into it professionally?
I had a few friends, and I started just recording bands, and I started really doing it at a younger age with like Cakewalk Sonar and some things really young. And like by the age of, I'm rare because at that time I was the age of 15, 17. I was bringing bands in, and I was, not even really charging anything, but I was getting into this groove. The funny thing is that really, I was kind of isolated. So from the audio community. So I thought I was inventing things that were already invented. Like I was like, oh man, how cool would it be? I was doing things so weird, and then I would think of this great idea, but it was actually a standard idea. And it was a little weird. Then I went to audio school, and then it corrected a lot of stuff. But anyway,
where you were like, this top end of the EQ here, if I turn it up, things get brighter. I should try that.
No, it was literally as dumb as we were all like recording in a live situation with a PA system. And I was literally like, wait, what if we put on headphones, we'll get isolation? Like that simple of a concept when I'm really young. But if no one tells you that concept, you don't know it. You kind of you keep figuring stuff out yourself.
Nice.
It's a weird.
Yeah, it's really kind of fun discovering all that stuff for the first time. For me, it was a 4-track cassette player. And I've said this before, but the thing that made me feel like kind of a badass engineer was I could figure out how to hook all the adapters together from Radio Shack to get this cable into that input on the 4-track,
I love Radio Shack.
I don't know it probably didn't have anything but a negative effect on the sound, but it did allow us to press record.
Totally get it.
Yeah, and then my friend's band would be like, can you come over and record us with your 4-track
right.
at the frat house? And I was like, sure, man. I'll do it. Awesome.
Got all these adapters. That's so great.
Groovy. So then you went to school and where did you say you went to school again? Was it Valencia is where you were teaching, right?
But I actually went to school at Valencia, and we were considering looking at Full Sail and some other options.
Where's Valencia, and where were you growing up?
Yeah, well, I was originally grown up in Pennsylvania, and then we went down to Orlando, Florida.
The state of pancake breakfast.
But so then down to Orlando, and I finished up high school there, and then we ended up going to, and I kind of looked around, and actually Raul Valery was the first guy that we talked to, and I just was so unsure, but then my dad kind of talked me into it. He said, I think this is what you need to do. It was a little cheaper, and it ended up just being a great fit overall. It just was a great program for me.
All right. So you left school, and then I know you've done a bunch of stuff, and I don't want to spend much time talking about it, but it's pretty cool what you've done.
Yeah.
And I know that where you're interested in going now is you're really focused on, hitting the studio with bands and stuff.
Absolutely.
But you've done some cool stuff. You've worked on TV programs. I guess you said you've even done a ton of dialogue editing and things like that.
Yep, you got it.
And you've done game music.
Yeah.
And those are all fascinating to me. Let's start with the game stuff for a second.
Oh,
because for somebody like me who enjoyed playing games but has never worked on them, I'm always intrigued. I'm like, what do you even do? Like, I think of a game, my brain wraps itself around making a 3.5 minute song in the studio, and you make a bunch of those, and now you've got a record.
Right.
But something about that seems real different for game audio because it's just this never ending. It doesn't really have a beginning, middle, and end, right?
Yeah, absolutely. There's that element. It's kind of a similar world to like getting a pitch to do a spot for like a commercial. If someone says, hey, we got a car commercial, here's the vibe we're going for. So it's a little different than working with a band, but like that's kind of that's what sets you up for that. But you know, and just to say, when I was at EA Sports, it was a very short time, but it was very like I learned a ton in that very small amount of time. It felt like a few years I was there.
What was some of the first stuff you remember learning about?
Oh my gosh. Well, first it was really fun being around an audio community of guys that were maybe, 10 to 20 years older than me, but they were in it. They'd worked on like some of the major games like Midway guys. And like these guys worked on like the games that we play like X-Man and like all these games from my childhood, they had worked on and they programmed. And they were telling me about, I mean, this is kind of some of it of a reality, but telling me how only certain information can fit on certain games. Like you can't put tons of audio information because the chips only the producers of the show say you're allocated this amount of space on the game. So they had to use MIDI and different techniques. And that was some of the neat stories that I heard from the other guys. Like, oh man, we couldn't fit this. So that's why we had to loop this so many times so that we actually didn't duplicate new information. We were repeating old information.
And those are the kind of games you were working on, or those are the ones they came up with?
When I came out there, it was like I was doing some audio editing for Madden and Tiger Woods. And I was just
all the sports games.
Some of the sports games. And I was chopping up some of the audio, putting that in the games. And then there was an opportunity, one of the directors over the Tiger Woods team, he said, hey, we're taking in submissions for music, but it does have to sound like this. We're doing certain cues that are going to be some different parts in the game. Like one of my soundtracks is in when you're going through the golf shop and you're trying to shop for what you want. Like my track gets played, I think, and I believe it loops, and my credits in there, which is kind of cool. But then there's also what they call just like cues that get random fired throughout the game. So for instance, you're done swinging the putt or whatever, you're done with the game part, and now the camera is going to do a transition. So it's going to pull from a bin of a cue bin. So it's going to a random bin. Let's pull this soundtrack from that. So they need a piece that can transition in and out of another moment in the game.
Cool. Yeah.
Right.
I guess in a way, I know you've worked on TV and film too.
Yeah.
In a way sounds pretty similar because it's basically music that accompanies the visual, the video or whatever.
Exactly. Yep.
So that's pretty wild. And then did you have to learn a ton of technical stuff about how games work, or is it more like you just had to know that there was a bin of cues and everybody, the other guys would worry about the rest
It's funny
of it?
Because like our world here is we kind of have to know everything.
Right, totally.
We have to know the marketing, the ins and outs, the patch bay. I mean, unless we get an assistant or something, we're kind of head. But when you work at that level, you're so compartmentalized. You just have your one job. It's like master the audio for this, cut up the dialogue for this, and then put it in this folder. And then there's a whole nother team of people that organize folders.
Wow.
You know what I mean? Like it's a massive deal.
So maybe just comment on what you remember the difference in work environment. Like what was it like to work in an environment like that versus when you're working in a studio with a band? How do those feel different to you or similar?
Well, something for me that I've learned about myself is I'm a true extrovert, and I really fuel off of people. So I actually struggle, and I think my work diminishes when I'm too isolated, and I kind of run my own ideas. So the nice thing that translates to the studio world with bands and a corporate environment like that is having the input of people. And I actually heard this from another interview that I was listening to, but just watching people's face as you play whatever you've been working on. So you're so in this thing. You've been in this for 40 hours. You've been in this thing for 6 months. You've lost your perspective. And so you appreciate someone's genuine, authentic response. And sometimes having those people around you to get faster responses, to have that, hey, is this working? Is this not working? Because they just came out of a 2-hour project doing something else. So they come in, hey, let me hear what you got going on. Oh yeah. Wow. Dude, you got something there. You killed that. Wow. What a moment. Or no, let's keep revisiting that, whatever.
Yeah.
So That's something I've learned about myself.
So, and then, yeah, all right. So I guess the similarities, you're still working with people, you're still interacting.
Yeah.
How does that apply to a studio situation with a band when you're producing a band in the studio? What are some similar ways or different ways that kind of stuff happens?
Well, things that are similar, I think, no matter what you're doing, you have to qualify what are you going for. And that's the thing is like art can be anything. I tell this to anyone. I always, when I'm kind of working with a client, the first thing I say is, what's better, Miles Davis drums or Led Zeppelin drums?
Nice.
Right? It's like, which one is better? And sometimes people answer, they say Led Zeppelin drums. I've had a guy say Miles Davis drums. They're the best. They're really both fine. They're both
Now, are we talking Max Roach when we're talking Miles Davis drums?
Yeah. So either way, they're both fine, but each one out of context is kind of wrong. So Led Zeppelin drums in a Miles Davis context is, I mean, it's something different, but it's kind of wrong. And then, something out of context, per context, if you define the context, then one is right or wrong. So with every project, whether I get hired out for a post-production project, we're working on a movie trailer, a video game, a jingle spot, if you don't say, hey, this is what we're going for, then there's no qualifier on what's good and what's bad. You could just come up with something totally random and they can love it or hate it.
Right. And it's just like a total shot in the dark.
It's a total shot in the dark.
Pulling the lever on a slot machine.
Yeah, totally.
Which I'm going to interpret as you saying that's not such a good thing, right? You want to be able to aim for the dartboard, so to speak, when you're making music with people.
And there's a balance to that because you don't want to, first off, you don't want to turn everything into a machine. And you don't want to turn everything into like incredibly predictable. But, you do want to hit a goal and makes, sometimes people want things that are more familiar, but sometimes people want new.
Right.
And that's another one of my, things that, but yeah.
All right, dig it. So you've worked in a sort of a corporate environment,
right,
doing stuff. You're also supporting your family.
Yep.
Let's see, do you have any more? I want to move over to the kind of stuff you're really interested in doing, which is producing bands in the studio and kind of spend some time on that.
Yeah.
But do you have any more comments you want to make about, that work-life balance and what it means to be working on stuff that maybe you're trying to transition from into the stuff you want to be doing when it comes to audio and recording?
Oh, yeah.
Particularly when it comes to supporting a family,
Oh, yeah. Well, I tell this to everyone. I think everyone has this idea that there's no compromise, that they're going to get the gig that has no compromises. And it might be something from a childhood. Like for me, I'm like, man, if I just played drums in Led Zeppelin, that would be the gig of all time. Now that I've been in the industry, the reality is that there's compromises and that even those top people doing that have to compromise. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So I also have to compromise, and you have to, I think it's important to choose what you are going to compromise and what you're not going to compromise. For me, I love working with audio. I love being creative. So I put a qualifier on some of that stuff. And sometimes I'm working on more corporate things that don't fuel me creatively as much. But I'm like, you know what? I'm willing to take that as long as I can fill it in other ways. Kind of some of that, the reason I kind of got into this, and willing to, hey, you know what? I got all these kids. We got insurance. We got bills. And you know what? That's okay. For this percentage of the time, I'm going to do this. And it's still going to be good, but I know this other piece really fills me, really fuels me. But I think the lie that we all get is like, there's going to be this gig,
right?
This opportunity, this perfect thing. But even as I listen to interviews with like some of the best bands I
bet John Bonham had to compromise.
Totally. I mean, but think about it. Like this band works really hard. They make this hit song, like whatever. Well, now they are required, after it's a hit, they're required to play that every night at every show.
Right.
Or else a lot of people get disappointed.
Right.
But guess what? They don't want to do that song anymore. Yeah. So we all think, oh man, it'd be so great to just play the best song in the world every single night. But then they're like, no, we're done with this. But they're trapped in it now. But they're compromising as well. Sure, they're making up new material, but that's a compromise, No,
it's totally true. And it's one of the things that I realized as I've tried a bunch of different things, this podcast included, is, it's that expression, be careful what you wish for, because you probably will get it.
That's
a lot of what you get in life with your music, your career, family, relationships, whatever it is.
Yeah.
is a result of the effort that you put into going after that thing.
Yeah.
You know, so like whatever you decide to do, you're probably going to get it. And
That's
it's always
correct.
good to have a good sense of like
That's
when
right.
it arrives, whether it's going to be what you were hoping for.
That's exactly correct. Yeah.
Well, very cool. So let's see. Let's talk about what you'd like to be doing more of now. What's your real passion in music and recording?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I've always loved working with artists and being incredibly creative. And I think, well, I'll share a little story about, I mean, there's tons to learn about some of these guys that I worked with, but when I was with Bob Katz, I'll never forget the moment when we were mastering something and, he's like, "Hey, Ted, do you hear this detail in this, do you hear this 0.5 difference at 8K? And I looked at him, I said, I do.
Of course I do, Bob.
That's right. But no, I did. I mean, he has the room tuned so you can.
That's cool.
But I also, then I made a comment to Bob and I said, man, you know what? We need a tambourine on that last chorus. Or I said, I wish they played this with a P bass or it was something like that. And he looks at me and he goes, I'll do my Bob Katz impression. Ted, we're mastering. And it clicked. And I'm like, I'm a little bit bigger picture. I love being in the more creative environment. Not that I can't be detail oriented, but the whole production as a whole is important to me. The songwriting, the arrangement. So I'm kind of shifting more so that way, but still taking the other work. And I'm so thankful. I mean, this has been a great last 3 years for my family. It's been pretty, I mean, sometimes I'm kind of speechless about some of the people that I'm sitting next to in the rooms, people I've just admired for years. And like, as a producer, sometimes I'm hiring those people because I'll hire a session.
Yeah, that's a real wonderful experience.
I'll hire someone that just, I remember doing, Elton John's tour. And I'm like, I'm hiring you today, kind of telling you what to do. How about, wow.
Nashville's cool like that. Al Perkins was one of the first people I got to hire for a session.
Wow.
And he played pedal steel and lap steel on
oh my gosh,
Exile on Main Street for the Rolling Stones. And here it is. He had been on a session I had worked on, and then I hired him and he came, and I was like, "Really? You're going to come work on this session that I'm producing?" So that was pretty cool.
I love it.
It's I feel like there's a lesson for all of us to learn there, to just be reminded that, go for it. It's like, you'd be surprised if you ask somebody to come do something for you. With working musicians, how that's part of what they do.
Yeah.
So like they're happy that you called them to come work on something. Right. Trust me, if it sucks when they come work with you, they probably won't come work with you again.
Right.
But they'll give you a shot,
Yep.
Not everybody's working 24/7 with the famous people only.
That's right. Another thing I'll say on that too is like, there's a part of me that's kind of starstruck sometimes. Like, oh my gosh, you get to do this. But then in the moment, you realize that we're all kind of equal, and there's a problem that needs to be solved. And that's why we're all in the room together.
Yes. And that problem is called the SONG, right?
Yeah. Or just if it's on a TV set, the problem is we're having tech problems and we all hustle up together. How can we get this working? Or if it's in the studio, it's still like, it's still a problem, and you got to use your brain.
Yeah.
We're problem solvers.
So one of the questions I always ask is, not always, but, if you want to share an important failure or a nightmare in the studio story that turned into a learning experience. And since you brought up problem solving, I wondered if you had anything in mind.
So I was, I don't mind sharing some of my strengths and some of my weaknesses, but I was born with a gift to I'm kind of a multi-instrumentalist, and I can pick up instruments that, like an instrument that's probably never been played before, and I can pick up something with it. So
wait, your superhero power is that you never make mistakes? That's amazing.
No, it's not true at all. Even though you got me a superhero mug here, right, as we're drinking coffee here at this awesome
Ted
studio.
The Superman mug here in the studio.
It's so awesome, man. But I think my ego and my pride kind of got in the way, because I could always fix a lot of the problems, even like in my smaller arenas, right? So my local bands, my high schools, the battle of the bands, I was the dude. I was the audio guy. I was the music guy. I was this and that. But then what happens is you translate into a big environment, like my first time at Integrity Music, and you're talking about massive budgets coming down the pipeline. Like they're recording stuff. I remember like we're recording bigger stuff like at Abbey Road Studios. And it's like, it has to be awesome. And you don't have a lot of ego stuff. And so me being a little younger, getting to working at my label as a staff studio engineer, I'm kind of going from the mentality of like a little bit of my small town thing where I'm kind of the man and I'm typically always right. And I'm going to speak into this now. And I've had a few guys just kind of step aside. It's like, hey, that might've been a great idea or not a great idea, but that wasn't really your place to speak.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. And so that's
a big intern lesson too in the studio.
It really, and that's kind of what it was. And it doesn't matter if it's like, even like in the military or something, you got a commanding officer and you got someone else, they might have the best answer, but that's not the place for it. That's not the job. That's
the system
not the role.
Doesn't work as well if anybody's just doing whatever.
Just barking at whatever. So that was probably one of my biggest failures that I had to learn because I've always been pretty good on tech stuff. Of course, not always, but like more the mechanics of the studio good. But I think learning the interpersonal relationships was something I need to learn when to press in and when to pull back.
Yeah, it's harder to learn how to just kind of bite your tongue and not say anything, I find.
Right.
I had a lot of stuff I wanted to say too. I wanted to get excited and, you hear something, I'd be like, oh, that'd be so awesome to just add the, do the like you would say to your band. Yeah. But it's not your band. It's a session.
That's right.
And it's other people's session and you're just there to help.
That's exactly correct.
I actually have a recent intern who we had the pleasure, hopefully if he hears this, he'll enjoy hearing this story too. We had the pleasure of going through that experience and it's happened before. I mean, like I said, it happened to me when I was interning at the beginning and I just didn't know to be quiet yet until I sort of learned that. And then
that's
I was like, oh, I get it now. But same thing with new interns in my studio sessions. And for me as the engineer, as the producer on it, I have to be the one to help educate them on, you're not supposed to be sharing your intern ideas.
That's correct.
Ideally, the schools should let interns know all this before they come in, but it's what internships are for. It's an opportunity to be in the studio and learn this stuff. But like, anyway, he jumped in on a couple of comments instinctively. They were a classic, just like leap right out and talk, oh, that'd be so awesome if you did this. I really like that one part right there. And I was like, my ear perks, and I was like, oh, I'm gonna have to comment on that. Oh, so I just sent him a text message in the studio. Yeah. And then he bings, and then he sends one back, and then he did it again. And the next text message I sent was just shh. Right. But anyway, absolutely, he realized and he appreciated it. And it was funny because it's the first time I've used text messaging and technology to try and help solve that situation.
Solve that in the moment.
I mean, because in the past you might turn around and you might just totally shut somebody down.
Right.
Can
we step outside?
Yeah. Or that might be a way that people would solve it. You step outside and you're like, hey,
that's,
or classic stories you hear about, the terrifying stories are the ones where like the producer was like, walked outside and sent that person home and they never came back to the studio again, that kind of stuff. Yeah. Our world's a little bit more real these days where it's like, $1 million budgets aren't being, won and lost on whether an intern comments on a session anymore.
Right. Absolutely. I mean, that was probably one of the biggest failures that I can think of. And the second one is probably just as a word of caution, just make sure that you really know your worth, and not undercharging what you're worth. And like sticking to that, because I think if you stick to that, if you say, hey, my worth is here, and if you stick to that, you might have to decline some work that either financially doesn't make sense or maybe it's just not a great project fit. But that will free up time that something else could come along. It's like, man, I'm so glad I said no to this. Because if I said yes, something else comes along and, you don't have that space and that time to say yes. So
you are in the process of kind of, you're in a bit of a transition from
That's correct.
Having done some stuff, focusing on the stuff you really want to do. I think that goes for a lot of our listeners too. I think a lot of people are either at a stage where they're just trying to focus more on making their own record, or they're trying to focus more on growing their home studio into more of a business and making more records with other people, or they're just, not even focused on the home studio and they're just in the pro world doing stuff. But talk a little bit about that transition and maybe even going from, hey, I've got this gig over here that really does pay pretty well and has a infrastructure that recognizes my worth. Right. And over here on this side, it's all independent artists and musicians and people who are scrambling together, pennies to make a record potentially at times. How do you balance those two things? And what are some goals or, advice you want to share about identifying what your worth is and not slipping up in that department?
Yeah. Well, for one, I think it's good to do your homework and do research. And I don't think enough people do that. Like do the real research of what are top session guys getting paid as an engineer, what are top guys getting paid as producers and all this stuff. And what are the rates and and then being super realistic about how long it takes you to do that. And I tend to bid, and I do quotes, project based, but they're really hourly based. The client doesn't know that, but it's like, hey, I'm going to guesstimate. I'm going to spend about 40 hours on this or 50 hours on this. And so putting that worth, and it's like, man, it's like, you know what? I genuinely think that I'm worth X amount of dollars, and you could just put that worth there, but it's like, so, and I think part of that is trying to get your setup quicker. So sometimes I'll invest in tools, not because they sound better or actually look cooler, but man, they get the job done so much faster. So if I can save 3 hours on a production, then I can actually make more per project and I can get more projects in.
Yeah. What are some things that come to mind for you about time savers in the studio?
Oh man, part of this goes into one of your other questions you'll probably ask me, but I've learned just getting it right on the front end is so much better. I mean, and I keep going backwards in this. So it's making sure you're getting it right audio wise. So we make sure we got a great pre, we got a great whatever, we got all the in, make sure it's getting captured right. But then right back at the source, right back at the microphone, right back at the song.
I guess one of the things for getting it right is starting with a great musician, right?
Correct.
That's a huge time saver I've found. If you've got great musicians, they can knock a part out very quickly.
Yeah.
If you are trying to coach somebody through a part, it could take you.
Yeah.
I've spent 8 hours cutting a bass part before.
I believe it.
Trying to coach a bass player.
I totally believe that.
The whole song. It wasn't one of our best records or anything.
Yeah.
But
well, I'll kind of related to your question. I'm going to share a pitfall that I've kind of gotten into and a way that I'm trying to get out of it. I think this might be able to really help some of the listeners. So I've worked on some label scale stuff to where I've actually seen my products in Walmart. So I have that kind of credibility, right? But then a client comes in and I don't feel like the songwriting or maybe the voice or some of the instrumentation is as strong. Okay. But I take the work, we get through it and it sounds good. They're happy with it, but it's not really the song itself wasn't written great, because we know there's songwriters here in Nashville and that's all they do for a living. And they have their 10,000 hours just in songwriting, that piece alone, not producing, not recording, not being a front man.
Yeah. No, right? I think this is a super important topic. I think I run into that all the time. It's sometimes you're just trying to serve the client and they're like, this is great. This is great. And you're like, I know at a gut level that something about this isn't right. And I'm not sure whether to push hard for that.
Push hard for it. Yep.
Or just let it go.
So one of my things is always whoever's paying the bills, they have the final say. So absolutely, tend to the client. And if they want to be pushed really hard to make this great, absolutely do it. And if you can afford it in time, do it, make it better. But one of my pitfalls is I actually have some A&R guys and some label guys and some bigger artist management that have sat down and heard my work, and they go, well, I've had two answers. One of them is dude, you killed this. I've heard people say, you really polished that turd, and then you kind of start thinking, it's okay, I did, but I didn't wow to get my next big project. And so I'm actually kind of really making sure that the original song and the original voice is really great for some of the stuff that's kind of part of my transitional piece of it, to really get some of that bigger attention, And I think that's something that everyone deals with. Because after you nail all the stuff, which it takes a long time to nail all this stuff, even if you're hiring out for mixing, to capture right, to layer properly. Another thing that I did when I was in Integrity Music, is I had the, actually, this is a good thing to talk about. I would get sent these major projects from producers, okay? And so this is how I really started picking up what the heck was going on. I'm just remember listening to these records, I'm like, these things sound awesome. These things sound amazing. How do they do this? So the director of the studio said, Ted, I have a task for you. We're making this project for churches. It's called Interactive Worship Live. And we're going to let worship bands sing stuff in church, but they have a setup of Ableton. So they can mute bass if they have a bass player. They can mute drums if they have a drum. So basically it's a breakout of the original master.
Right.
So you're creating a stem breakout, a simple stem breakout. Okay. Sure. Sounds good. But then I get sent the master session, and guess what? It's missing half the plugins. It was mixed on a console. It was mastered so-and-so. But they say, Ted, we need stems. But I go, we're missing half the information. Well, make the stems. Make it as close as you can. So I actually had to reverse engineer the work. So I'm seeing the stacks, I'm seeing the layers, and I'm like, there was so many weird guitar things. I remember calling a buddy of mine that worked at the label. We came down. I said, can you believe it? Let me play this thing for you. It's this weird, stupid guitar part up in like 4K. It's like, and like, you would never know it would be there. It's in the stack of the chorus. And we're going, you recorded that? And then we mute it. We take it out. It's like, oh, I see why they put it in there. It filled that upper mid-range. And then they'll do something different with a piano stack, like a slight whirly or again, this is a little bit more radio commercial, how they get that fuller sound, but it's not always 18 guitars. It's a little bit of organ, a little bit of pad, a little bit of this.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's a lot of, it's the sum of the parts, or what is it? How does that work? The sum of the whole is greater than the sum of the parts.
Right.
That's what I'm trying to say. I feel like I hear that when I listen to classical music, and you start really paying attention to how, an instrument will come in and just do one little part and one little range, and they're sitting out for long times and stuff like that. Because, when we come from a background of being in a band and being a musician,
right.
There tends to be an original group of 4 of us or 5 of us. And guess what everybody wants to do if they're in the band? They want to play their instrument all the time,
Right.
So we start out with this concept of music that is, you should be making a lot of sound for 3.5 minutes.
Absolutely.
And then you have to learn and evolve that maybe you shouldn't. Maybe you should just sit and wait for one little thing to happen in the super chorus.
And that's actually a little bit of why, if I can, I try not to say it without saying egotistical, but I have the ability, because I've done full jingles by myself. I play guitar.
By the way, it's okay to be egotistical here. This is recording studio rock stars. You're a rock star, man.
All right. So no, but I've been able to score little jingles and all this stuff, and I play all the instruments, right? I play bass, I play drums, and I do that. I'll sing some background vocals. But sometimes when it's something, it's it's a lot heavier to think about. I try to not play, because I'm going to do exactly what you just started talking about. I'm going to, oh man, I haven't played drums in a while, man. You know what I should do? I should just, man, this would be fun. I should practice my paradiddles just on this.
Y'all got a second kick pedal?
But it's that same thing of arrangement. Not everything is right all the time. Just keep backing it off and just getting that perfect mix and pulling in. Yeah.
We'll stay on that topic for just one sec, because I was hanging with friends and we were hearing some new songs and trying to figure out what we would do on them again. For a project we're going to do later. And it was that same realization hitting me again of how, when you first are listening and learning, you really need to listen. You need to listen to what the song is.
Yep.
And then figure out how to add to it.
Yep.
And I'm always fighting the instinct to want to just start playing immediately. Because that's fun.
Oh, absolutely.
But the problem with playing immediately is it causes me to not necessarily be listening when I should be listening.
Yeah.
Gloss over it. Yet at the same time, there is a form of listening that happens when you're playing, not just listening. There's your brain kind of shifts into a weird space. So
it's so good.
Maybe talk a little bit about that. When you're first, let's say you're about to produce a band in the studio, and they bring you their material.
Right.
What are some of your ways of discovering the music so that you can help create the best record possible for them in the studio?
Yeah. I think for me, very much like a painter. I know I'm not the first one to ever say this, but like you paint with a palette of colors, or like a good interior designer will be like, all right, so our accent pieces are red and yellow, but most of the general tones are this. So they have a palette of maybe 5 to 6 colors. It doesn't exactly translate, but I try to.
I need to have one of them come over to my house, I'm pretty sure.
I was going to say something. No, that's great. But so that's the first conversation. What's the palette? Is this an electronic thing? Is this is this like an Alabama Shakes thing? Is this just a raw, gritty? What is the palette? As well as the song. It's like, so the song's one element, but it's like, what are we going to dress this up with?
What are you typically listening to? What's the first thing that an artist sends you? Is it, hey, just send me an iPhone recording of you strumming the acoustic and singing the song? Or is it sort of like the band rehearsal, or is it their demo?
Yeah. So if it's with an indie band or whatever, it's just typically like a raw demo that they happen to like grab off the church console 2 mix and send it to me, and just what do you think? If it's an independent artist, it's literally just like sometimes an iPhone recording of someone holding at them, they're strumming through it and doing that, or, just little, and I'm just listening to the main meat first, the main meat and potatoes, like the chorus, the stops, the breaks, the arrangement. Does it have a bridge? Does it need a bridge? And I'll just to qualify, I don't always insert myself. I always make sure I'm like, hey, do you want to hire me as a producer today? Or am I just an engineer? Because I'm okay being an engineer. Right. That's fine. Let's just call it what it is. And if you like me to just turn the knobs and you want to make all the creative decisions, that's fine. That's totally fine. You're an engineer. So like getting that palette, like for instance, one of the artists I just got to work with, I think I might have sent you one of the tracks. He wanted to do what we all want to do, which is get a whole bunch of people in a room together and bang on instruments and make a lot of fun. But then we started talking about almost like a little bit of an A&R path. It's like, well, where do you see yourself going? And he was like, well, man, I really could see myself being like a little bit more like John Legend or maybe like Justin Timberlake. I was like, oh, okay. So when we started putting some of these palette references together, I'm like, you know what? As I started listening to all their latest stuff, none of these guys have real electric guitars or a real drum kit. I mean, there's a few splashes of a drum kit, but most of it is programmed.
Right. It starts out in a computer.
Yeah. And I would, if I could all day, I would just, make Eagles records and stuff all day. Cause like, I love the organic, nice. the real instruments myself, but we're establishing a goal. What does that client have? Hey, this is where I'm trying to go. So I said, as much as I kind of don't want this, and I know you don't want this kind of, I think it's best for us to kind of program more of this to get to the end goal.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
I've definitely produced albums for artists, and we start with the drum kit. Yeah. And then as we're working on, I realize, you know what, this really just has to be a programmed kick drum for this to even work.
That's right.
So I might add it later as a program thing. It's always a little bit easier if you start by adding it at the beginning.
And it's important to extract your preference versus the goal.
Yeah, and another place that happens a lot to me, I think, or at least repeatedly enough for me to recognize it, is I love guitars and I love distortion.
Oh, yeah.
And so I'll work on a track with an artist and I start pushing the distortions.
Oh, yeah.
And it can be easy sometimes for me to push it too far, and now it's turned into a rock track when it wasn't meant to be a rock track.
I've done that before.
Because instinctively I just push for a little bit more energy, a little bit more. But when you add up all the mores, you end up with something that like sort of might leave the original intent of the song.
Hey, I brought another thing came to mind that I thought would be really important. And this is a general principle of life, is that you're the sum average of 5 people that you hang around. And I think that's also true for music. So you're also kind of the sum average of all the stuff you're listening to. So if you're listening to a lot of indie alternative and you're producing indie alternative, awesome. If you're listening to dubstep all day and then your gig that day is indie alternative, you're probably going to, at some point in the session, there's going to be a problem.
Have you been sneaking a peek at my Spotify list?
But it's funny because we instinctively do this. we kind of like take from our vocabulary that we've been hearing for the last month, and we subliminally kind of want to start implementing that. Like I've done the same thing. Like I want to start implementing heavy guitars and turn into a heavy rock track. But guess what? I was listening to some heavy stuff that last 2 months. So I think it's super, super important for a business, not so much a personal, but as a business to like, hey, what are we going for? And to not accidentally implement a bad idea that is just because it's your taste of that month.
Yeah, I think that's really wise, man. The whole discussion about establishing your palette. So let's just hypothesize here for a second.
Sure.
So you're about to work with a band, an artist.
Right.
Maybe they're starting with iPhone recordings, so it kind of could be anything.
That's correct.
You know?
Kind of a blank slate.
And sometimes that's hard. Sometimes you have to remind yourself, hey, they sent me a strumming guitar and they're singing over it. This doesn't even have to be guitar.
That's
correct. It could be a keyboard that goes like bleep, bleep, bleep,
That's exactly
bleep, something totally different. And maybe that would be the coolest version of this. In fact, as we were working on this new record, I started to deconstruct the way we were thinking about what he was showing us. So he's playing sort of quiet acoustic guitar and singing, but he's got a voice where he can, this is Sean McGovern is the record we're going to be doing. Nice. And Sean has years and years of singing in a cover band, and he can be that voice up on stage, rocking out a U2 track or, you know, doing 80s, 90s cover with massive production. But he's playing us these songs as acoustic and sort of a quiet vocal, right? So it doesn't necessarily have to be that. Like I need to think about it and go, okay, let me imagine this, what he's showing me, as if it was a friend covering a great Replacements REM song that's full production. Yes. But he's just strumming it lightly on acoustic guitar. Yeah. And then sort of like deconstructed that way. So I don't know. That was a little bit of an epiphany to me. It's
no, dude, it's absolutely true. One of my problems sometimes is that the artists, they're kind of, they're singing in, or they're in the wrong genre kind of. And that's a tough conversation. Because like they might be listening to something maybe because it's popular or because for whatever reason, all their buddies' circles are listening in this genre, but you know that their voice, man, you could kill an Ed Sheeran song.
Right, right.
Wow. And it would be so awesome. And almost like kind of present that. It's like, dude, could you imagine just doing like an acoustic ballad? Oh no, dude, all my friends are listening to this stuff. It's like, can we try it? Like, can we just try this as a strip down and just see how this works? Because like, you know, I've heard so many voices over and over again, like, and I'm like, man, the timbre of your voice would sit really well behind this kind of piece. You know?
Well, I mean, you know, the story of the Red Hot Chili Peppers, they kind of did a big transition from.
Oh no.
Well, they just had been doing a thing for decades, and then I guess right around the time they were working with Rick Rubin and stuff, and they did Under the Bridge, I think is the title.
Okay, yep.
That one was like, hey, let's highlight this harmony of you guys all singing together and stuff, which they had never really done before. Okay. And not only did that not screw things up, it transitioned them into becoming, a #1 band.
Wow.
So I
love
just,
that.
That's sort of a takeaway for me is stories like that, where it's like, it's that rediscovery of your sound and being willing to try some stuff and go for something that, might highlight what you're good at now, even if it's different and doesn't represent all the things you've done before. Yeah. As long as you don't lose all your super fans on the process.
I think the role of a producer is really important. I just remember even watching some documentaries, and I remember like the Tom Petty, like Free Falling. And I just remember this little excerpt, and I remember Tom Petty was like, I just don't know what I'm feeling about this chorus. And he didn't, and the producer came and he said, and I guess Tom Petty had something weird on the back end of the chorus. It kept going on. And then the producer was like, no, what if you just left it there? Free Falling. But that moment, if he didn't interject, if he didn't really subjectively kind of like look back and just like, what is this piece? I mean, that song has changed the history of music.
Right.
Right.
I totally remember hearing that song for the first time on the radio. I was driving around Massachusetts.
Oh, so good.
And I was looking to buy a Strat.
Oh, cool.
And I had looked in the used paper, and I was like we didn't have GPS and phones back then. So you're just like trying to like figure out where this address is in some strange town across the state. Just trying to find a house and go take a look at this used Strat. I didn't end up buying it, but I did listen to Free Fallin' and it stuck with me.
Oh man, that's so good.
Well, so hey, let's take a break now. We'll come back in a moment for the jam session. But before we go, Rockstars, I want to remind you that you can find links to stuff we're talking about in the show notes. We may or may not have a YouTube playlist for you there, but we'll have links to Ted's stuff as well, and you can go check it out. And if you're interested in learning more about mixing yourself, if that's sort of the stage you're at, go check out my free mix tutorial called mixmasterbundle.com, and you can download multi-tracks there, and I show you how to mix in any DAW using free plugins, stock plugins.
Awesome.
All right, we'll see you in just a moment for the jam session. Cheers. Roswell Pro Audio brings you microphone design that is out of this world. Endorsed by a growing list of artists and producers like Phil Collen of Def Leppard, Ross Hogarth, who's recorded Van Halen, Ziggy Marley, and the Doobie Brothers, and Super Dupes, working with Drake, Mary J. Blige, and Eminem. These are all rock stars that have discovered just how great Roswell microphones sound. Check out the Mini K47, which uses a capsule modeled on the one in the vintage U47 at a street price of only $299, or the beautiful Delphos condenser microphone with a capsule tuned like the vintage U67 with great clarity and far lower noise at a street price of only $899. In fact, you are hearing my voice right now on the beautiful Delphos microphone. These mics are carefully crafted by hand and immediately feel good even before you plug them in and hear how great they sound. These are well-built microphones that will last you and your studio a lifetime of great recording. Check out more audio examples of these awesome mics at roswellproaudio.com. Hey, rock stars, we're back now for the jam session. My guest today is Ted Skolits. And Ted, are you ready to jam?
Let's jam, man.
All right, dude. So tell us, let's jump back into some more questions. I thought I'd actually start by asking you to share a story about working with Roger Nichols.
Oh, man. It was so cool working in an animation studio. I was actually working with his daughter as a video editor, and Roger came in a contract for some of these, for these animated shorts that we were working on. And this is kind of also when I was younger. I didn't really understand some stuff, but I know he'd worked with Steely Dan. Roger Nichols has passed since, but worked with Steely Dan, John Denver, and I mean, his credit list, he'd done stuff with Frank Sinatra and the Beach Boys. Amazing. And I got to work with him, and I got to actually attend one of his master seminars, but I went to his house. I got to go to his house and see some of the stuff that he built. And if you guys don't know, Roger Nichols actually invented the Wendell, which was one of the first.
No way. The Wendell is like that's the trigger machine, right?
Yeah. So I got to see that, and he told me stories on how that was made, and I couldn't believe it. Like right now, me and you can go to Best Buy and get like a gig of RAM, or even like 4 gigs of RAM for like $20 or $30, right? So that was before computers. So he was actually kind of building the first computers that were interfacing with sound and music. So I remember there was he was trying to get one ride cymbal sample into the machine, into the Wendell. And they spent, I think, $80,000 in production costs to get the parts of the memory sticks of RAM, okay? The little whatever it was, 56K of memory sticks that he had to go to Japan to try to get them to build the motherboard to make this actually have one length of a ride cymbal sample into the machine, right?
That's amazing.
A few years later, they ended up, the story goes, is that he actually, there's a few songs on one of the Steely Dan records, I don't know the exact one, but there's a few songs that were the first kind of completely programmed songs.
Really?
It was actually so crazy, the story goes, is that the Musicians Union had a lawsuit against Roger Nichols because they said, where is the credit for the drummer? We hear a drummer on here. We know there's so we need to, do all the legal fees and stuff. Where's the drummer? He goes, I programmed it or whatever. Or that wasn't even a word. I used this Wendell machine. And how crazy of a story is that?
That's bizarre. And if I recall it too, the Wendell was a machine. It was a rack unit, and you would pop a cassette in the front.
Yep.
Just like the Atari 2600, you would pop a cartridge in, but each one of those cartridges would be a sample for a single sample.
Since we're talking about that's all true. Since we're talking about Roger Nichols, I can do some impressions, and I just remember this moment of being. So Roger Nichols, he's also very smart at all this other stuff, like astrophysicist and just chemistry. He's just he's a real brilliant dude, not just in music, but technology and stuff. And so anyway, I go to his place, his studio, and I'll kind of do my Roger Nichols impression for you here. So this over here, this is the world's lightest bicycle. that I made in 1979 that won a few at the World's Fair. That's what this is right here.
Nice.
Puts the bike down. This is Grammys. We're working on the first thing with Steely Dan. And then this is the first subwoofer that's completely flat response that I helped build and calibrate with so-and-so. This is the 24 track that was that we record all Steely Dan stuff on. I mean, it was so cool. He's like kind of walking me around the room, picking up this stuff. And I'm like, this is a museum of amazingness. And I'm just kind of like taking this and I'm like, wait, that's the world's lightest bicycle over there. You know, the guy was really smart, and it was kind of a neat moment. It was a neat moment. Trip, man. Yeah.
Okay, so let me jump in and start talking about some of the stuff you've done, some of the records too as well. You shared with me a video of an artist named Corey Voss.
Yeah.
If I'm pronouncing it right. And it's gorgeous music. It looked like it was a live performance, maybe in a church that was part of being videoed for TV or something, but you also produced the music and everything. Maybe talk about that project, but particularly, I also noticed that it looked like everybody was singing into AKG 414.
Oh, absolutely.
And the BULS version, I think.
Yes, that's
and
right.
I love those mics. I think they're great sort of vocal mics that sometimes we forget to just use those on stuff.
Yeah.
I wondered if you wanted to talk about that a little bit. Also talk about the fact that I didn't see any pop filters on those, but I didn't hear any P-pops on
So Eddie Joyner is actually the engineer of that studio, and he helped set everything up. And I had some questions about some of that stuff at first, but let me just say this about, it kind of goes back to the earlier thing of getting stuff right on the front end. I was pretty blown away. I was proud of that project. I didn't actually like produce it. I just engineered it and mixed it for broadcast. So, but I play it back every time, and I listen on great speakers, and I'm like, I'm really proud of that work. I love it. I love how it sounds, but so much of it was done on the front end. So Eddie kind of helped set up 414 mics, and I'm just like, okay, that's fine. And then they were going through an actual Neve AMEC console, and then out of that, it went to an actual like a true LA2A. So I look over the LA2A, and it's pegging 11 on the loudest moments. And for the first time, I just go, I'm going to keep it. It sounds awesome. So just getting that right on the front end, having some of that gear. And also after that, we got prism converters. So, and with a really great master clock. So having some of that, gear, again, you could totally make records even on the Empire Pursuit you're going to ask about, we did on Digio too. So you could totally make projects on lower end gear, but having that on the front end, man, it made it so much great. So great on the back end, just mixing that and putting that all together.
Well, it sounds like, you're describing that situation that I kind of remember too in the studio, which is those times when you turn around and you look and you're like, oops, I'm totally screwing up the technical side of this because the needles are burying on the compressor. You're going into the red, you're doing other things.
Exactly.
But when your ear is telling you that this sounds great,
absolutely,
and you learn to not
go
mess
with that
this stuff up, don't touch it, don't dial it back.
Yep.
I just had that experience doing a vocal thing the other day. In fact,
cool.
I did a massive vocal shootout, and we tried like 20 vocal mics. And
nice.
Came up with one and ended up choosing the Mic Tech C7 actually for his voice, which sounded great.
Nice. I've been wanting to check that mic out.
But I looked down at my settings. I'm doing a triple compression thing. So I've got the 1176 going, the Calrec compressor, and then I'm also going into the Teagler, the Veritube recording channel.
Yes.
With its Verimoo compressor.
Yeah, and they're all doing a little bit.
Yeah. And it's got a cool sound. But it's also like I looked at my mic pre-level and it was much lower than I normally do. And I was like, wait, this is too low. And then I went to go try and adjust it. And when I adjusted it, it totally screwed up the sound. I was like, you know what? It sounds great exactly where it is. I'm going to back it off. Usually it's the other way around. Usually I'm like too hot and I'm like, and I try and back down and it's not as cool.
Yeah. Man, just having the kind of human wisdom to just step back and be like, does this work or not? I don't care if, and sometimes when I do Foley work for films, like so I have to record the footsteps of people walking, or maybe they're rustling out to grab a trash bag and do some of that work that I've done before. But you know what? No one sees you making that in the Foley pit. So guess what? Guess what wins? The best sound.
The fact that you were stepping on a grapefruit to represent, I don't know what, but
exactly
doesn't really matter.
It doesn't matter. It's at the end of the game. So I think we're talking about the same thing. It's just like, let the ears, choose and win. You might be technically out of spec, or it might be a really weird way to go about it. There's been some sessions. I did this one session with a band, and this guitar this guitar amp that we had running through a Rhodes. We had it running through, and the guitar amp was broken. It had a tube in there that it sounded like jingle bells. Like whenever when you wrote it too much, it sounded like I don't know, like
you can hear
bell.
something physical in the back.
A bell, it was something. And then we took another amp, like, oh, let's fix this problem. We put the other amp back into the proper amp, and it changed the vibe. We're like, everyone in the room said, wait a second, I missed that sound. That was such a cool little quirk of the record. I'm like, I can't believe I'm saying this, but yeah, throw in the broken amp again. That was
That's right. I mean, there's
wow.
I don't know if you've ever run into this specifically, but there's a whole level of using like 9-volt batteries that are dying, where some distortion pedals sound much better when the 9-volt is not a full 9 volts.
Didn't know that. Super
and so
cool.
I have something called what is it, Batman or something. It's a little battery
checker
simulator, and it has a rotary knob on it, so you can actually dial in less than 9 volts when you're powering certain pedals.
Oh, that's cool.
And that can cause things to sound cooler.
Oh, cool.
So yeah, no, I think it's good to do that. And I feel like coining a phrase here, which is let the ears decide. Because we always say like, trust your ears.
Yes.
But let the ears decide. Yep. All right, cool. So let's talk about another record you did, which was Empire Pursuit.
Yeah.
So this is like what you shared with me was a hard rocking track.
Yeah.
And it was cool to see that you had played the drums on that as well.
Yeah.
And the drums were one of the things that really shined on that. It really has like a quality of being very forward, and the drums were never they never sounded too wimpy for the track or anything. So I wondered if you could talk about what meant to both play the drums on that, to play the right kind of stuff, and also to get the right kind of sound for that, so that, the drums are cutting through the guitars and stuff.
Oh yeah. And just a little tidbit on that project. I've had people be like, man, where'd you work at? What studio you were at? What made your pre's? On that one, again, this isn't the case every time, but that one was done on a Digio 2 in a bedroom.
Oh, wow. Nice.
That whole thing was done on a Digio 2 with the Digio 2 pre's.
It sounds great.
And SM57s all over the place. And I think a little bit more work was in post, but, and thanks, man. I appreciate that. I think that was one of the first times I think I put something out, especially me playing on it, where I felt like we didn't do the thing that we were talking about earlier, like overplaying, but just like playing for the song. Like what's just enough. Because another thing as a drummer, if you play too much in between, too many ghost notes, too many fills, too many cymbal hits, you actually have to turn down the drums. Have you ever thought about that?
Right.
If you only
too much
have
information or something.
If it's too much information, so if a snare drum goes you can have it actually pretty hot in the mix because it won't overtake the rest of the information. But if you have a da-da-da, it's actually too much. So it actually has to lose in the mix. It's got to come down about 3 or 4 dB overall. Yeah, there's definitely times where you can play more notes, but I think that was where I was like, I feel like this is appropriate. Devin, great singer, songwriter guy. He came up with a song. We kind of threw this band together, and I'm really proud of it. A lot of stuff, and I think in the mix, some references I was listening to came through in that. One little tidbit.
I wanted to comment on that.
Oh, sure, yeah.
The bands that come to mind when you're talking about that kind of snare, I think of like Motley Crue, big hair metal bands, Def Leppard and stuff.
Yeah.
And it makes sense. It's why those productions can have such big kick and snare parts too, is because they're very simple and they're so few and, far between.
Yeah. Well, it's kind of like our perception of loudness is over time, right? So if you hear a foghorn go, burp, or if you hear it go, burp, it sounds so much louder, even though it's the same volume over time.
Yeah.
So if you have more going on loud for longer, you want to turn it down. If it's shorter things, like if you have a super short snare drum, to go, you can actually have that probably 10 dB hotter in your mix because it's not perceived as loudness because it's over time. It's a short sound.
Yeah. That's an interesting insight. I think that's true. And I've found that it is easier to turn up snares like that,
Yeah.
The short, quick ones.
Short, quick one. You keep pumping up the mix and it doesn't like give you fatigue and feel too much.
A previous guest on the show, Chris Ronan Murphy, he teaches drum recording as well. And
Cool.
that was one of the things I remember him talking about and teaching was like, go listen to a lot of your favorite records and a lot of hits, and you'll be surprised. Those snares are pretty quick.
Yeah.
They're quicker than you remember them.
Interesting.
And it probably is part of allowing, especially if there's a lot of guitars and stuff like that.
Sure.
I don't remember on Empire Pursuit whether you feel like that was sort of a short snare, so it allowed you to bring it forward through the guitars versus, if it's like a skong, you're gonna have to really bury it.
I'll say this too, and I know you know this because you do a lot of engineering and mixing, but the slower the song, the longer the tones, the shorter the song, or the faster the song, the shorter the tones.
Yeah.
So I feel like getting that, I almost try to make the snare decay almost one measure. I don't do that as a math piece, but it almost feels right. So if the tempo is ta, 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 pa, pa, it should almost last the full measure and get out of the way so it can start again.
Right.
Does that make sense?
It's a backbeat if you're just hitting it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think artistically you can choose whether you want that decay to be reverb or if you want that to be the skin to keep decaying.
And then when you get more advanced and you're getting into the mixing and stuff like that, and you begin to really understand deeper levels of compression.
That's right.
That's where you begin to understand that, attack and release times are all about allowing those instruments to speak in that right way musically for that rhythm of the track as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Totally agree.
You can cause a snare or a kick drum to get out of the way quicker or to hang around longer. To be audible during, a longer count.
Yes.
Depending on the tempo of the song.
Yes.
All right. So any other stories you want to share about the Empire Pursuit stuff? What about guitars? What were some things you learned about recording rock guitars?
Yeah.
Especially if you're recording, Digio 2 in a bedroom environment.
Yeah.
Let's talk a little bit about that. You may have, we've certainly got a lot of listeners that are working in home studios and are always love to hear great tips for how to record in a home studio environment. Yeah. And then, so share any tips you learned about that.
Oh man. So, I guess it depends if you're using amp modeling or not, but if you have the opportunity to record an amp, I would always choose it because there's something about getting air in your recording. Like having a distance between the source and the mic with air in the recording makes a difference. So, because a lot of guys are going direct in right now, which is totally fine. And I say, if you're going direct in, if you're using an amp simulator, try to put as much stuff in the middle of that as you can.
Right.
So heck, put two preamps that have transformers on it and an EQ. Run it through the EQ.
Just to give the original guitar a little more character before it hits the computer.
Well, the thing is like the more direct the sound is, the more transient it is. And that could be bad because the electric guitar, if you ever plugged a guitar DI, right? Electric guitar, what does it look like? Has a big spike at the top. Bang! And then but that spike is almost too big. So all these really sweet amps that we love, these Class A boutique amps, they're actually rounding out that first transient and making it more into a kind of mono block that sits really nice in the mix. So first thing, if you can get the opportunity to get tubes, real transistors, all these electronics, get them in there. Second, get it right at the source. So literally first get the part right. Second, get all the knobs and switches right. Get the
player right.
Get the player right. Get the, figure out what knobs, the tone adjustments. I probably drive guitar players nuts because sometimes they just want to do their thing, but I'm always in their stuff. I'm like, give me 50-50 on that. Can you split that? Can you use that big muff distortion, but can you do a parallel on that and that? So I'm always trying to get it super right in the beginning. And then trying to thicken it up later. On that one, we actually did elastic audio quantizing on the tracks. So that one I did what I've been told now is considered to be the LA style of pre-production, which is track the drums, quantize the drums, not 100%, but I got them like 80. And then guitars onto my 80% track. So my thing is if I'm going to quantize, get the bass and the drums as tight quantized as you can, because I don't want to have everything be loose and then quantize everything after. Then it's going to be weird. So I'd rather them, if we are doing a straighter to the grid, I'd rather get the grid tight and then have the other stuff, the little licks and stuff, have that not even be to the grid. Like, don't even grid them. Just have them go off of the tightened grid.
Play off of a really tight drum and bass track.
A tight drum beat. You got it.
Yeah. Have you found times when it is appropriate to elastic audio or quantize guitars? And are there smart ways to do that?
Yeah. If you're using Pro Tools, I would I would switch it over to polyphonic and then go to the warp mode and really spend some time and study the warp mode and actually moving those nodes around. And I would, I think a great audio tip is to see both extremes. Always when you're trying to learn a new technique, see the extreme of it. So go ahead and over quantize when you're first figuring that out. Like make it feel almost too robotic, just so you know, and then make it maybe feel under, so you can really learn how to find that sweet spot of when to quantize and how much to do. Another little trick, if you're having an issue quantizing the electrics because you did it on the front end,
what if it's distorted and it's just a little hard? It's hard to see where the notes are on this thing.
Yeah, a great tip for that is to actually just take a DI split and track the DI dry. So you're coming out of your electric guitar into your direct box. And if you get a proper split, one goes to the amp, get your dirty signal, then get a super clean, put it into Pro Tools. You'll see those transients.
So you're recording on 2 tracks.
Recording on 2 tracks, but you're actually probably not going to use that DI track. It's just a guide. So use that as a guide to snap everything to your transients.
And that works pretty well.
Yeah.
Cool. Yeah. All right. Let's see. What about recording yourself in a home studio environment?
Oh, wow.
What have you learned about that? About the best way to make sure that you're getting the best sound for what it is you're recording? I feel like it's a little easier on a guitar because I'm hearing the guitar come right out of the speakers while I play it.
Right.
Even though I know if I worked with you as a producer, you'd probably adjust my guitar amp even more because you're hearing it just as a listener. But what about things that are a little more harder, like drums, like getting the vocal settings just right? Any thoughts on that stuff? Let's just do drums. Have you recorded yourself in a home studio on drums, right?
That's right. Yeah. I mean, the biggest thing is to probably keep going back. I think the best projects I've ever done have been the ones that I think everyone knows this feeling when they go, it's not quite right. I should probably go back. Is it worth it? And the times you keep saying, yes, it's worth it. Yes, it's worth it. If you keep doing that, and it could be something as simple as, oh man, I feel like I should have taped up the back of the bass drum head because I could feel that little mama after every hit. It's like, okay, that's a small decision. Fix that small decision. And you keep massaging those small decisions, hearing the thing in context. So I learned this from Roger Nichols too. Sometimes if you're working with a big band or big project, it's good. There's just few opinions on this, but you can do it. His philosophy was the band, if it's a big band, it should work as a solo, it should work as a duo and a trio. For instance, if you have a bass, guitar, drums, all this stuff, heck, even strings, right? You should be able, in theory, solo 2 or 3 of those, just the bass and just the acoustic. And that should work.
And listen to it and it's still groovy.
It should still be groovy. It doesn't always work, but I think the most important thing is big context, big picture. So at the end of the day, it doesn't matter how we got the sound, what's the overall end product goal. But if you're trying to figure out, my overall product goal is not good, so you start soloing little pieces out. How do the drums sound just by themselves? Does it sound like good enough to where I could actually put this out? No, those toms sound like junk. Wow, those overheads, a lot of phase problems. Ugh, wow, that's definitely the wrong cymbal. That's a splash cymbal. This needs a large cymbal for this decay. So those small decisions, keep just massaging those. And they're hard to do. It's a discipline because we like good music, but sometimes we just don't want to work that hard to get there. So I think that the harder you say, you know what, we're going to do this right.
Well, I think sometimes it's fun to be playing the instrument, and it's not so much fun if you have to keep getting up and going over and being the engineer too, and then coming back. And there's tools now that make it a lot easier. I remember the first time I recorded myself was at the studio Alex the Great, where I started out. Okay, and it was on ADATs, and I would get some things going. Yeah, and I'd have to be in the control room, hit record on the man, what was that thing called? I don't even remember. It was the big remote control. Okay. I think it was the BRC. It was the big remote control. That's what it was called.
Yeah, that's right.
It was the BRC. And I'd press record on the ADATs, and then I'd run out the door, run in the other door, run over to the drum set, and sit down and try and play the whole drum part while it was going through, And one of the weirdest experiences actually was I was out there, and they had these, I had the music going, the headphones on. They had these weird red colored lights. So I'm sitting there and playing in like a a weird red light, really lost in this. And I've been in there all weekend, so my head's just saturated.
Right.
And I look down and I'm playing the part, and I swear I look down at my foot on the kick drum pedal, and a baby snake is winding its way across the floor and goes between my hi-hat foot and my kick pedal and just keeps going. And I was like, well, I ain't stopping now. So I just still played out the whole part. It turned out great.
Baby snake.
Maybe I'll share that story with you. Plus, I was a Frank Zappa fan. Baby Snakes. That was one of the songs too.
Nothing wrong with some Frank Zappa, man. That's so great. Well, I would say if you're an instrumentalist, I think the biggest thing is you need to always think like a composer, as a big picture arranger. Even though you're doing just that little snare drum part or just that bass part, you need to think big picture, because if you don't, you're going to end up overplaying. You're going to end up putting too much information in. You're going to end up just doing weird stuff or not doing enough. If you're not thinking big picture, because that's the one of the negatives, is that when you're in a group with a band and you guys got 5 or 6 guys in the room, you're feeling out, whether you want to admit it or not, even if you're skilled or not skilled, you're feeling out what's too much and what's too little.
Right. And you're also listening, hopefully, to those other 4 people.
You're hopefully listening, and the better the players are, the harder they listen. And you're saying, okay, there's a hole here. I can totally do this cool little palm muted riff because there's a hole here, and we haven't heard guitar in a while. So we can bring this in, but then I'm out. A good player. But when you're multi-tracking everything yourself, you almost have to make up stuff. I'm like, well,
right.
It's tough.
You don't know what's coming. That's the problem. It's the building a house one brick at a time thing without a blueprint,
That's right.
And so that, I think, is a reminder to us too, is when you're creating music that way, one overdub at a time, you don't know the big picture until you get there. And so,
yes,
be kind to yourself. Accept the fact that you're going to play a little, you're going to play not enough and too much on a certain level. That's correct. Then have to edit afterwards to make everything just right. I like to err on the side of recording just a little bit too much, because we can always mute it, but you have to get really good at throwing things away.
Yes.
And if you were to look at the basement of my house, you would think I have no skills in that department. It's because I focus all my skills in editing music on the computer. I'm much better at throwing things away when it comes to Pro Tools than I am when it comes to stuff in my house.
One of my problems I have sometimes is that if I do the same mentality you do, right? I say, I'm just going to put this keypad here. It's just going to, I can always remove it later. This is a little problem that I have. Well, I put it in there, but now I've played it now 20 times with it in there.
Right.
But now it actually feels wrong to take it out, even though it probably should have never been there to begin with. So, but your brain says, oh, I'm totally used to that keyboard pad being there, but really it wasn't a great decision. So, and that's a tough one. And for that advice, I would say, come back to it the next day. Yeah. Come back to fresh. Try to get away from it. Come back to it. It's like that keyboard pad has no place there.
Yeah.
Even though I got used to it in the moment, so it had to stay.
Yeah. Or turn it way down or turn it way up.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, cool. So let's see. How about vocals? Producing, tuning, and mixing vocals for a pop track like Empire Pursuit.
Sure.
What stories do you want to share, or what advice do you have about smart moves? I mean, I think if you're going to do modern pop production, you're going to probably have to address the issue of tuning.
Yes.
Do you have any advice around that department?
Yeah, I know some people have the mentality of like they'd rather get the performance rather than the pitch. I really like to get the pitch because I hate the sound of autotune and Melodyne. Like I really don't like it, and unless you're using it for an effect. But man, I really try to get the pitch right, and so that could be something like the vocalist taking the headphones off and on. I was just talking to another friend about this, but one thing that I do is I let them get their first pass or first 2 passes out of the song completely first. Super low stress, low pressure. Hey, let me hear what you got. Sing the whole verse down, sing the whole thing top to bottom. Bring them back into the studio. So you're not telling them that doesn't sound great. And they almost don't know to believe you or not. You kind of build credibility, bring it back to the studio. Hey, something I heard, I thought that you, and first always bring in positive, vibes and really try to like build people up and articulate their strength. You can always find a strength with somebody.
Will you do me a favor? From here on out, will you send me a text message every morning that says, Lidge, remember to be positive today in the studio? Because I could use some of that.
Oh, dude, we all can, man. Absolutely. But just being like, man, I absolutely love the way that you did that pre-chorus. I love how you switched to your falsetto and your head voice or whatever. I love that. Was really good. But I don't think that the bridge is anywhere close to the quality that you put into the pre-chorus. Let me show you. Play it back. Ted, I know you're right. But if they were in the booth doing that, it's a little different than sitting back. It's like they get their own kind of fresh ears on themselves. And then you can start to attack stuff. So now we've built trust. Hey, I do have a good opinion here. Let's go ahead and let's tweak this around. Let's work on this part. And then after you get the main piece of the part done, whatever the melody is, whatever you think the stacks and the harmonies, whatever those pieces are going to be, now let's just get just the right piece so we can comp it right. So let's try that just a little airier. Let's try that. The airier. Oh, that was good. Let's get the airier right into full voice. You think you can get it? Okay, let's try it. Full voice, airier into full voice. Perfect. Yes. We're going to fly that over a few times. That was the take.
Right. Well, so recently I was just doing vocals and we were layering some stuff, and I tried the technique of, rather than describing to somebody why that one take didn't sound right to you, which is also hard to do because
it is hard to do.
I learned to just trust my ear and trust my gut. I actually don't know why it didn't hit me right, but I just if it didn't hit me right, I'm just going to say it. I learned to just trust that.
Yeah.
I mean, I can be wrong too.
No, absolutely.
But there are times where something happens and it just hits me right.
Yes.
And then I'm like, okay, I'm just going to play them that one that just hit me right and let them figure it out.
Yeah.
It's their voice, so a lot of times I think somebody can hear what they did and they can go like, oh, I know what that means to me and how to perform it. Or they might just get inspired to, to perform the next take. I think in a similar way.
I think a lot of musical people that listen to music, producers and regular listeners, is that we don't want too much sloppy, too much junk, but yet we also don't want too much hyper polished, robotic pieces.
Yeah.
Which is why I think even like the robotic things they're still hybrid, or they're making it feel. So I think that's important getting vocal takes too. I want it to feel natural, but I also want some of a decent performance. I don't want so sloppy and pitch and kind of slurring and stuff. But sometimes
you just need attitude more. You just need some
attitude more than like precision. So getting that balance. Yeah.
Yeah. And then there was also the challenge of, for example, when I was recording vocals recently, we have a demo vocal, which was pretty great. And, and we went for it on this new vocal. And then I went back and listened to the demo vocal again.
It was better.
And no, it wasn't necessarily better, but it was different. And I was like, you know what? Is a totally different kind of mic setup. Is singing in a totally different environment on a totally different day.
Yep.
There's no way that we're going to duplicate that same thing. So really the only option for us was to just go for it as best we could this version.
Yes.
Finish it. Later, you need to bring back that powerful ability to hit delete.
Yes.
And just listen to two and fresh ears and just go, which one's better? That's the one we're using. I don't need to listen to the one that wasn't better anymore.
I've gotten myself in that pickle a few times where like the guys, we put it on a scratch track for everybody. And occasionally the scratch track is better, but all the gear isn't set up right. And, I mocked it up. Just a quick and dirty. Hey, what are we working with here in Pro Tools? And what do we even have? Do we have a double? What is it? A double bridge? What is this? And then I put it in there. And then 4 days later, when we're going to actually do the real guitars or the real vocals, it doesn't match. And so I've had people do jumping jacks. I've had people run outside, get the energy back up, doing weird things with their voice, try to sometimes to match the original demo, but now on the good gear, which I want to do. We love, working on a really high end mic or a really good tube compressor that's dialed in just right. But the scratch was done on an iPhone, and it's
never
like,
gonna sound the same.
Oh man, how do we get that back?
You just got to record it with an iPhone.
That's right.
All right, cool. So let's talk about some of the challenges to recording and mixing bass.
Oh man.
What do you want to share about that?
Yep. Bass is one of those things, like I've had some really great bass players comes in and they say like it's all in the fingers, and it's absolutely true. And the timing to getting that with the kick is a big deal, or like without the kick. I have a lot of issues with bass players being overly dynamic. Like, I think some of the best, I learned this from Shane Wilson, one of his seminars. He said one of the keys to great bass is BASE. Like, make that your bass, like almost like compress it, make it kind of a solid brick. And like, that's kind of your BASE to let the track sit on.
Right.
And I think the players that go into that a little bit more from the beginning, they play a little bit more tastefully and articulate. It'll sit nice in the track.
Yeah.
Well, there's another part on a plugin that another question you have, which I'll share in a little bit, but it's related to bass.
Share it now. So it's, what is it? Share a favorite software tool, a plugin question. So
I'll tell you what, and I think everyone has access to this tool, SansAmp.
Yeah, SansAmp is one of my favorite plugins for mixing. It's just, you can just dial bass in, you could dial drums through it, you can dial vocals through it.
So the physical unit is great too. The great,
there it is, right
there you go. It's right here in the studio. So it's a great place. But I'll tell you what, especially if you guys, this is an absolute home studio trick hack. Absolutely. If you're going DI into stuff, you do not have a space. You can't get the air in the room we were talking about. Everything's carpet, right? You're missing girth. You're missing harmonics. You're missing some energy. Take that track, right click, hit duplicate, and make a parallel with SansAmp and screw with SansAmp and turn down and just tuck it in the mix.
Yeah, just blend in a tiny bit.
Saved me so many times. I was just working on this one project. I was like, it's too clean. I paralleled the whole master on SansAmp.
Nice.
And I tucked it in. I started bringing it up just a little bit. Not overdone. It was like, it just started, there was like nasty little crunch on the low end and on the mid range. And I was like, that's it. That's silly plugin, man.
Do you ever follow Chad Blake's work?
I feel like I've heard a few pieces.
Yeah, he's pretty famous for using the SansAmp.
Okay.
As part of his workflow.
Okay.
And mixing.
Gotcha.
I'm sure in tracking as well.
Yeah.
And it's just such a great way to dial in low end. I've a band I was producing, the Spinto band years ago. I remember they sort of requested that we feed the kick and snare back out and kind of add that through the SansAmp, and we did it. And I just remember having this moment where it's like, man, that just sounds so awesome. Man. Just a simple move of kind of reamping it through a physical SansAmp, but you can do it, like you said, with the plugin as well. It sounds fantastic.
Oh my gosh. Absolutely. And I think one of the lies that a lot of audio engineers believe starting out or whatever is that like the low end is everything past 100 hertz on down, which it is. But a lot of the good part of the bass and the kick drum are up in the 200 hertz and the 300 hertz. And the SansAmp,
the body range.
Yeah, they can bring that to life. And earlier mixes, I was just like, oh man, I'm going to put this all down in the mud and I'm going to like have the low bass be like this, just like super sub bass. But then you go and listen to it on an average set of consumer speakers, a laptop, a car, and there's nothing there because that speaker system can only go down 200 hertz on down or whatever, so there's no bass guitar, there's no kick drum at all because you didn't feed any information up in the upper mid range to make that sit through.
Yeah. When I think of the three frequency ranges, the low end, the highs, and the mids.
Right.
And I think of that car listen later where that tells you, it's like it tells you at a gut level that you've got this right or you don't quite have this right. I feel like I turn up the volume of my car stereo enough to where the bass is kicking, and that makes me feel like, okay, this is loud enough.
That's
I'm
the right
jamming
level.
this.
Yep.
And then the highs need to be there just enough. Like if there's just enough high, then it sounds hi-fi. It just sounds like there's clarity.
Clarity. Yep.
And then the mids, if I've got the mids right, they're sitting at just the right spot where it balances out against the lows. And it's probably the other way. It's probably more like I turn it up to the point where I'm like, the mids can't be louder because they're hurting they're starting to be uncomfortable to listen to.
Yes.
And at that point, I hope that the bass feels like I've got it cranked.
Dude, that's awesome. I actually loved what you just said because I've been doing both mentalities, almost like turning up stuff so much that you turn down the stuff that's not right. But I did that for a long time. I'm still doing it. But now I'm actually doing the opposite. I'm mixing super quiet to bring the stuff up that really needs to be, because I'm realizing that I listen to music louder than most people do.
Right.
And the mix sits different at a lower volume.
Totally.
So if you're listening to it kind of nonchalant, if the mix is on, got a little boombox on the side, let me throw in this. I haven't heard Skinner in a while. So you got a quiet volume. How do the vocals come out? How does the detail, that little snare shuffle come out? Just go. Does that come out in there? And if it does come out, that means you listen as if you were summoning, have it in a boombox in the garage, and do they hear most of the information you were trying to get across?
Yeah, well, I mean, when we listen to our favorite records, we don't think twice about being able to listen to them at a low volume on some speaker that's playing across the room.
Yeah,
but you still expect it to sound great, or you still expect it to sound like the record, and so. That's an epiphany, is to realize that when you're making your own mixes and your own productions, you should be able to, if you got it right, you should be able to listen to it also off a small speaker on the side of the room and have it also sound just right and like a record. And if it doesn't, and you're trying to talk your way out of it, you're just making excuses.
So my studio room has a great setup. My room sounds pretty good and it's tuned really well. And that's great. And it impresses clients and all that, but it does need to translate other places, because a lot of mixes sound great in my room. The great ones and the not so great ones, they all sound pretty good.
Right.
So it's kind of like, man, this stuff needs to translate on a piece of junk system. And so that's a little bit of this last 2-year epiphany, because I'll bring my work other places, or I'll just pull up my website and I'll bring it over a friend's house and whatever they have. And
it's got to sound great when
it's got to sound great there too. So yeah, totally get that.
Well, so do you want to talk a little bit about your studio setup? I mean, you want to describe it a little?
Yeah, I'm really big into, again, another trick I learned from Roger Nichols. Even before we started, when I was working at this animation studio, he requested that we calibrated the room, and I didn't get it, to be honest with you. I was like, man, that's technical junk that doesn't really need to happen. I just, to be completely honest with you, that was 10 years ago.
You're like, let's rock, man.
Yeah, man. I was like, let's just do this thing. Why do we do that? But now I'm like, man, if you can get a room that sounds as flat as it can, and that you enjoy, and it's also flat, and you feel like it's a good level mix to where it's good. Because here's the thing, boom boxes and every listening experience is so dramatically different. You could have something that doesn't do any frequency. It has a weird bump at 200 hertz, right? So you kind of have to be kind of flat level. So that's something that I really made sure that I did really well. I read a acoustics construction book for my place, and kind of got into it. I went probably a little overkill maybe than most guys would at their home studios, but that's okay. But man, just get you cannot go wrong with getting some 703 or rigid fiber, fiberglass, and making your own traps. We got some good traps around here, but man, get a cloud if you can, and I say all these things are upgrades to where your investment is. Like, for instance, my wife is doing photography right now. And right now we're on a mid-level DSLR, and she's showing interest, and she's actually getting some really great shots. But we got to make sure that we're not over upgrading too fast.
Right. You gotta afford your upgrade. You
gotta afford your upgrade. So we just rented a lens, and we kind of did a wedding, and this lens looked unbelievably amazing, but it's almost $1,000 lens. But we kind of have to get to the point where are you in this enough to do $1,000 lens?
Right.
And that's what I would say to anyone. Same thing in a studio. Are you in this enough? Are you at that point to where you want to dump $1,000 in acoustic treatment into your room, as well as the extra $2,000 to get the burl converters, the extra little, are you at that point? And have a good, honest assessment of where you're at. Is this hobby?
Totally,
Is this business? And if it's hobby, guess what? I got this job that makes great money. And guess what? This is my hobby, and I'm gonna go spend $2,000 on a burl converter because I love it, and that's okay. Right. But I think it's good to call it what it is. If it's gonna make money, it's gonna be a reinvestment. Call it an investment.
Yeah, and I think a good eye opener is when you start thinking about spending money on your studio and your gear, if you're doing it professionally as an income, and you accept the fact that this piece of gear you're about to buy doesn't come from you. It has to come from the clients that you already worked with or the clients you're about to work with.
Yes.
And if you think about it like that, then I think it helps you feel better about saying yes or no to different things.
Yes.
And also, it's a very legitimate way to say it. I mean, literally, it's like, it's a value exchange between you and a future person you're going to make a record for.
Yeah.
And it's a way to make their record better, you know? So it helps you justify it.
I tell this to people, call it what it is. If that thing is just, if the studio is your sanctuary and it's your outlet, don't make it a business. If it's a business, call it a business. And you probably have to buy things that you're not going to want to do as fun.
If it's a business, can you make it your outlet sometimes though?
It can be, but I think it's good to make a good distinction. It's like right now, the stuff on my list that I have to buy is not fun.
Right.
Like I just had to do an upgrade of Ozone to Ozone 6 to Ozone 8.
Right.
Not a big deal. Not a huge investment. But guess what? I probably, as a fun person and a person that loves music, I would have rather gotten a new snare drum.
Totally.
Man, I would have rather got like a Rickenbacker bass.
Or some really good beer to go with that snare drum.
I do love some craft brew.
Very cool. Well, let's jump into some of our final, usual jam session questions, and we'll roll out here. We've covered so many different things. I don't know if you want to share any more stuff about any favorite hardware tools in the studio or software tools, maybe?
Hardware, definitely, like I said earlier, the more tubes and stuff in there generally is better. Unless you're doing something like that needs a lot of crisp articulation, then actually skip all that stuff and go right to and do less. But if you're generally dealing with a lot of information, a heavy bass drum, a lot of guitars, put it through more stuff. I've just been really loving some of these LA2A. And I got some new gear that I'm looking at that I'm excited to do.
It does seem like rock music tends to appreciate more stuff that it goes through. It's why like analog tape and mixing consoles that have saturation to them are all good fits, whereas EDM music, maybe each sound is already created to be
already compressed
for the most part just right.
Yep.
And so you want like a lot of clarity and transparency in your chain.
And let me just put this out there. The power of the bypass button. What a big deal.
The power of the bypass.
The power of the bypass. I mean, that could be like its own audio book and seminar right there. And Bob Katz is big on that because you can make a decision. Does this really, and it's a hard question. Does this compressor help or hurt the sound?
Right.
And the biggest thing that I can do is try to level match as much as you can. So if the compressor in general is taking off 4 dB on the biggest hits, and we're talking about like actually a hardware or a software. If it's generally taking off 4 dB, I'll put the makeup gain at 2. So split the difference. So when you hit the bypass button, you kind of get a closer sense of not the loudness effect to where if it's louder, it's better.
And you got to do the bypass pretty quickly back and forth.
Yes.
And keep tweaking until you're like, okay, those are level matched. And I like to do that as quickly as possible.
Yes.
And then pause.
Yes.
Now turn your brain on and listen to one versus the other and try and decide if they're, one's better than the other. And that goes for plugins as well. So for example, the CLA classic compressors, those are great compressors. Amazing. And I love using them.
Yes.
But every single one of those, when you turn it on, it makes it like 3 dB louder or something like that.
Yep.
And it was a smart marketing move. Smart move on their part because of course, most people, all of us are going to gravitate towards this sounds better because it sounds louder.
Yes.
But if you really want to use them in a smart way in your mix, start, and I hope I'm not stealing your next tip here, but start out by taking those new plugins you just bought and engage it in default and then adjust it so that it's not doing any compression, but your output gain or your input gain is level matched.
Yep.
And you can even use just a tone generator for that. If you don't want to have to judge it by ear, you can just run tones through it.
Yeah.
And put it in and out and just look at your meter and see if the meter matches up. And then save that as a new default.
Yeah.
User default or whatever, or just make that the default for your plugins when you pull them up so that when you add the plugin, it doesn't change the level. It just gives you a chance to start squeezing it a little bit. And if you use Logic, for example, one of the nice thing about those compressors that come with Logic is they automatically have auto gain is turned on.
Oh, right.
So you could just put a compressor on a channel
and
start gaining it and you won't lose the level.
That's right.
you'll just hear the more compression, which is pretty good.
Another thing is like kind of what I said about getting it right in the source. This isn't necessarily a hardware tip, but there's not a EQ or compressor or Sans amp or harmonic generator that will do the difference of moving a snare drum mic 2 inches. It is getting that 2-inch difference on a guitar cab or a tom. Like, it is unbelievable how much that difference makes, more than sometimes a lot of the hardware units.
Okay, so here's a tough question.
Yeah.
What makes more difference? Moving the mic 2 inches or making the drummer do a second take?
Oh, second. I would totally say second take.
Second takes are better or not always better?
Man, I think the performance first.
Yeah.
I remember I got so frustrated because I saw this artist that I know on YouTube, and he did it. It's actually, his name is Tyler Ward, and he did an iPhone recording in an airport, and he did the song, and it was from like the iPhone, and he used the little selfie camera to like put the video up. This thing had like 1 billion views, and guess what? It was fine enough, and it just blew my mind. I was like, the worst mic in the worst position with the worst amount of ambience of people in an airport around you, but the emotion still translated through to me. And I was moved by the song. I was like,
and the emotion of the song was angst of missing a flight.
That's right.
Now I like that. There was, I forgot who the artist was, but there was somebody who did a video years ago and they performed their song to a click. So I think they had a guide of some sort so that they could stay in time, but they used the video camera mic to record it.
Okay.
And the video would go from different settings to different settings. So the ambient space that he was performing in changed with every shot change. So it's like you're playing the song and it's dry in the verse, and then you go to the chorus and you're still strumming, and it's like the camera was the same distance from the shot, but all of a sudden in the chorus, it's like wide open because you're in a garage or something. Oh, man. Just such a cool concept.
Totally cool concept. And how having that ambience released and stuff, because like sometimes when I'm doing TV production, I have to put all the background sounds in first. So the crickets, the dogs barking, all that stuff. And I've had people come in and, you see that. I mean, this is the last project I worked on. I maxed out my Pro Tools track count multiple times.
What is the typical amount of tracks you need to have available if you want to do TV and film stuff?
Oh yeah, like all of them.
But I mean, what's all of them? It's like we're talking about like 250 tracks.
256. Wow, so I keep maxing out. Amazing. But at the same time, a lot of stuff I'm keeping disabled for copies. For like, here's the original dialogue without any noise filtering on it. So I can go back to the raw.
Right.
And so like I have a lot of safety nets built into the session as well that's taking up the track count. But I guess the point is that if I mute the ambience and the backgrounds from the film, so the wind, the trees, the whatever, the dogs barking and stuff, you mute it, it's just like, that's weird.
You're like, what happened to my brain?
That's weird. And so it's interesting with recording too, just the ambient, the certain filters and things that you bring in that can really build that. So
yeah. I did have a question I wanted to ask you.
Yeah.
And this kind of, you talking about TV again and me remembering about, doing bands in the studio.
Yeah.
If I was to ask you, what message would you like to have to bands that might come work with you in your studio? Do you have a message or any tip or advice you have to them as they, kind of get ready to come work with you? Yeah.
One thing is that the value of someone having the 10,000 hours behind them is a big deal. So when Photoshop first kind of does anyone remember like when Photoshop first got hacked? Like probably like Photoshop, like CS1 or CS2, everyone had a copy of Photoshop in their home. Their mother was a graphic designer. Guess what? I can do my own graphics work. Oh my gosh. Well, guess what? Now, here we are 20 years later, and we're all not graphic designers. And we're all not like, oh man, I have the software to do a billboard. Man, I tell you what, I can, I got Apple Pages and I can do that. There's now a mentality that goes, no, there's someone that needs to study the theory, and they had to mess up 5,000 hours of that 10,000 hours, whatever the ratio is. They have had to mess up. And so there seems to be a little bit of a loss of value to where now I have the gear and we could probably just do it ourselves. Or I watched a few things on YouTube, and there's definitely some times when that exists, and that's okay. But if you're trying to get to a higher level production, you need to bring in someone that has 10,000 hours, that has looked out kind of objectively and seen projects fail and go great, and they need to come to you and have some input. And there's value in that input. And the value, a lot of the bands don't realize where the value is. Sometimes the bands think the value is in the gear, and they think the value is in having someone kind of cool or something. But the value is some of the stuff that they don't realize is even value. Like how you're psychologically kind of pushing the session along, or maybe you're taking people in and out of the room because you've caught the dynamics,
right?
That the bass player does not jive with the vocal. And every time the bass player is in the room with the vocal, that he starts to feel defeated. Right. So I'm actually going to ask
the vocal can't ask the bass player to leave, but the producer can.
But the producer can. That type of stuff is also what you're paying for. But that's not what you get being cheap and doing it on your own.
Yeah. So a couple of takeaways from that is, maybe for bands, maybe a good way to understand that is like the times I've tried to do my own graphic design.
Yes.
And I like put in a bunch of time and hours messing with it. And I tried using these tools, and I get to a point where I'm like, wow, this thing I just made really sucks. It's time for me to get, call up somebody who's really good and get this knocked out very quickly,
Yes.
And then another is just realizing that if you're the band and you're ready to make this great record, you need to put a lot of energy in, and you want your energy to be funneled efficiently towards a great result.
That's correct.
And if you're trying to wear all the hats yourself,
yes,
then you're sort of dispelling a lot of your energy in a lot of different directions.
Yeah.
Where you could be putting all your energy into I'm just going to focus on performing well. I'm going to focus on my songwriting, just being a super tight band.
That's right.
And we're just, our greatest energy is we're going to listen to each other as musicians.
Yep.
Because we know that we can trust that Ted, over there who's recording us in the studio environment, he's capturing the stuff. I don't have to worry about that stuff because he's got it. So I think that's a good reminder for all of us.
Yeah.
And that goes for me too. I mean, like, it's the same thing if I'm producing and recording and mixing, but I know I've got somebody who's got my back when it comes to mastering, for example,
Well, let's just imagine that if your business card said, Liz Shaw, mixer,
master of everything.
Yeah, exactly. It's like photographer, landscape artist, and all this stuff. I mean, eventually the person's going to step back and be like, I don't know how much.
Be like, I don't even know what to hire you for.
I don't know what to hire you for. And like, where have you really put your time and energy, or are you just trying to grab a quick buck?
Yeah, you're like, dude, you put car washing on here. I just want you to wash my car. I mean, you put it on your card.
That's great, man.
Cool, man. All right, well, let's kind of hit to our closing question.
Sure.
Let's take the Wayback Studio machine.
Yeah.
And go back in time, and you can find young Ted.
Yeah.
Who's doing a drum solo.
Wow.
Watching his dad do a drum solo in the strobe lights with the bubble machine flying everywhere. And you're going to give yourself one bit of advice. You say, listen, young Ted, before you go on your excellent adventure, I want to give you this one bit of advice. Here's the single most important thing you need to know to be a rock star of the recording studio yourself. What advice would you go back and give yourself?
I think that's kind of like a deep question.
I'm all about the deep questions, man.
It's good, man. It kind of like gets you almost kind of sentimental. But if I think that was one of the hardest questions I had to deal with. But I think one of the biggest things I'd probably have to say is, if you have a dream, if you have a vision, be very clear on your compromises. Say, I'm doing this to get money, or I'm doing this, but it's not the A dream. I think too many times I had an A dream of recording this and that, or producing this, or arranging. I mean, there was a point I was scared to arrange. I said, I can't imagine scoring a video game or whatever it was. I can't imagine that. But I think too many times I just kind of step back. Well, I'm going to be a little safe. I'm going to take this front of house gig tonight. Well, I've done that before. I'm safe with that. Opposed to, I'm going to go in my studio and I'm going to hustle and come up with the next video game soundtrack.
Yeah.
So if I were to go back, I would tell myself, hey, stick with that A plan, hit it even harder, because you can do more than you think you can.
Yeah.
Because I think it's just being very alert about what you're compromising on. And I think probably I might have compromised too much and spread myself a little too thin.
There's Eleanor Roosevelt had a great quote, which is to do one scary thing every day. You know, it feels like that's what you're talking about, which is sometimes the smart thing to do is, this also comes from Buddhism, which is the concept of leaning into the sharp points.
Okay.
Which is like, just lean into the sharp points a little bit. Like, just lean into the discomfort and discover that it's not that discomforting. You know, like you can actually learn that skill. You can do that thing. You can accomplish more than you thought you could.
Yeah. And I would just say, guys, keep listening to these kind of podcasts, Pensado's Place, all these other podcasts. There's writers podcasts, and keep absorbing. The minute you start saying I've absorbed enough, you're probably out of the industry.
Yeah.
Totally. Keep absorbing, learning, guys from Lidge, these great resources. And that's how I kept growing, is listening and learning. So
yeah, and another thought that just pops into my head too, if you are learning new stuff, Rockstars, and you want to share it and talk about it, come join our Facebook group. So just go to rsrockstars.com/FB, and that'll take you right to the Facebook group. It's a public open one. You can come be a rock star there and introduce yourself. And, you know, if you've got questions, ask them there. There's tons of people checking that out, and always happy to jump in with thoughts. You can share your mix there, get some feedback, whatever you want.
Yeah.
Ted, let the rock stars know how they can find you online and learn more about you and check out your stuff.
Yeah. You can check out my website, tedskolits.com. And my Instagram is pretty lively, so you can just follow me on Instagram at Ted Skolits. And then I also have a Facebook page. Then the link is there as well for the Facebook page. And I'd love to hear from you if you guys got any questions or comments, or want to learn more about all those different things that we talked about, front of house, video games, all that different stuff. Just hit me up.
Right on, dude. Thanks so much for coming and being on Recording Studio Rockstars. Absolute pleasure. Again, it's an honor that you would just take out this much time, considering how much work you probably have to do to support a family of 5 people and do this for a living. So
this is awesome.
It's wonderful to have you here, and thanks for being with us, man. It's great to meet you.
Love it.
All right, we'll see you around the studio, dude. Cheers.
Yeah, cheers.
Thanks so much for listening to Recording Studio Rockstars. If you enjoyed the show and want to help make it better, please leave a rating and review on iTunes to help reach more people. You can click directly over to iTunes or go to recordingstudiorockstars.com/review for an easy explanation. And if you want more free content, all you have to do is text RS Rockstars to 33444. Again, that's RS Rockstars to 33444, and I'll keep you in the loop with articles, videos, and podcast updates. And I'll let you know about any upcoming giveaway offers, all totally free. Thanks for listening. I'm Lidge Shaw, and this is Recording Studio Rockstars. Now, go make great music.